the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers, sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام.
So we are now at the second lesson in the mini-series that has to do specifically with the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just to remind of the overview or the structure of this mini-series. So in the first lesson until now, we basically covered the topic in general. So we introduced the topic of specific prophethood or special prophethood, which we said to a large extent is simply an application of the principles that we discussed and we presented in general prophethood. So there were 10 lessons on general prophethood, in which we ask questions like, how do we establish that someone is actually a prophet? When they make a claim, when someone makes a claim that they are a prophet, how do we establish the validity of that claim? And what are the general traits that we want to see in someone who is supposed to be carrying a divine message from God? And what is the type of communication, or what ensures that that message needs to be in a certain way? So basically, the infallibility of the message, the revelation itself, as well as the infallibility of the person carrying that message. And then we talked a little bit about the best way to establish the prophethood of someone, apart from one, knowing their history and knowing that their character traits actually match those of someone who can actually carry that type of message from God to human beings. That's one. And two, relying on previous prophecies. So if you already believe in a prophet, and you believe in the prophecies that they've communicated to you, and they've told you that there would be a subsequent prophet sent to you with such and such characteristics, and you recognize and you're able to apply those characteristics to someone specific, then you can rely on those prophecies and say, well, this is a prophet that I was promised. And what we saw until now is basically how Prophet Muhammad's prophethood can be proved or established using those two manners until now. So we look very quickly at his history and his life, and of course this would require a very extensive study if someone wanted to get into the details, but I think it's, the starting point could be the fact that he was well known as being the trustworthy and reliable one, trustworthy one, truthful one, Sadiq al-Amin, and so on and so forth, and we'll touch a little bit on that today as well. So that's one, and from the other side, we said that if we go back to previous scriptures, we find indications in them that there is someone who will be sent to carrying certain traits, certain characteristics, and we see that those apply to Prophet Muhammad. And again, we said that this is a very extensive topic that would require a good study, but at least we're giving kind of the hints and indications on where to direct our studying and exploration if we wanted to go in that direction. Based on that, we said that in the majority of cases of human beings, those two manners of establishing the prophethood of someone are very limited, are very restricted. We even said when we gave the general prophethood lessons, we said that they're dead ends. Because the majority of people are not that well aware or that well intimately knowledgeable of the personality, of the history of someone before they can establish that that person's personality and their claim to prophethood are actually aligned. So unless you are very intimately aware of someone, which will work for people, let's say, living in the time of the Holy Prophet, but it doesn't work today. So unless I spent a good portion of my life studying the life of the Prophet, I would not be able to say, based on what I see, his personality, his history from the time he was born until he made that claim 40 years later, that is 100% aligned with someone who is telling the truth. There is nothing in his personality that would lead me to believe that maybe he's trying to do this for personal gain, or that he's unstable mentally, or whatever someone may say. So that path becomes a dead end. So I cannot establish his prophethood based on that alone. And if someone wants to do that today, then they need to spend a good portion of time studying the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, starting with their life, starting with their family and their birth and their personality and how they conducted themselves and so on and so forth. The second way, as we said, would require also an extensive study, because it would require that we delve deeply into the scriptures of other religions to see where they may be referring to Prophet Muhammad. So unless you already have that belief, that you can rely on a well-established belief that you are certain that you believe in a divine prophet, and you believe in the revelation, and you believe that part of the revelation is this promise, this prophecy, unless you have that, then you can't really rely on that to establish the prophecy, the prophethood of someone coming later. So while we establish them now after the fact, and we can spend a lot of time on that, the truth is, for the majority of people, those would not become the strongest manner in which you can establish the prophethood of someone like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why we said the main way to establish the prophethood of someone is through the third path, through the third approach or proof, which is to rely on their miracle. When someone says, I'm a prophet, either you know them, or you rely on a previous prophecy, or you tell them, well, prove it. Prove that you're actually sent from God. And here is where usually what they try to do is to come up with something, to do something, a sort of act that breaks away with the natural order of things. And that's a miracle. That's what we refer to as a miracle. And the point of the miracle is to establish that this person is actually sent from God, because otherwise anyone else could duplicate that. And if they can duplicate that, then what is their special association, their intimate relation with God? How do you prove that? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them something, a sign, that people, when they see it, they say, absolutely, this person can only be someone sent from God. And we spent enough time, I think, discussing this idea of miracles and the difference between a miracle and a karama, the favors or graces that Allah may give to some of His people, or the false claims of some people saying that, I am carrying a miracle from God and I can do something that no one else can do. And we answered all of those objections in general. So now we want to apply it specifically to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So once we've established the two first points, that was previous lesson, now we want to start talking about the miracle of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the miracle, his main miracle, being the Holy Qur'an. So that's why this lesson is actually called the miraculous nature of the Holy Qur'an. So the lesson is basically a long introduction. Kind of half of the lesson is the introduction, in which a number of premises are established, and we'll talk about that. And then we have the author who actually goes into three different manners of proving that the Holy Qur'an does have a miraculous component. And that miraculous component is sufficient to say that it is a miracle, and it does establish the validity of the claim of this man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he is a prophet sent from God. So that's basically the lesson. A long introduction with the three arguments that are going to be presented in this lesson. There are many, many others, but the author chose these three. And they don't all fall into the same type of argument. And we'll explain how they differ when we go through them very quickly. So the three arguments, or the three aspects, the author calls them factors, but I think it's more aspects of the miraculousness, or the miraculous nature of the Qur'an that are going to be presented in this lesson. The first one is the classic, most traditional, strongest one, the most historically influential one, and that is what we find in the text of the Holy Qur'an itself, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. And here, so we summed it up under the heading of the eloquence and the rhetoric of the Qur'an. Okay, so that's first argument. The second argument is the Holy Prophet himself, and we touched on that topic the last time we met. The Holy Prophet being the person carrying this message, carrying the Qur'an to the people, and yet he is considered by his people and by anyone who studies his life until today to be someone who's illiterate. And we talked a little bit about that, and we'll come back to that point a little bit in passing today. So the illiteracy of the Holy Prophet himself, and what does that do to the miraculous nature. How does that help us with the miraculous nature of the Holy Qur'an? And then the last argument, so this one falls more under the category of the first argument here, which is when we look at the contents of the Qur'an, when we look at what it is saying, the contents, the substance, the arguments, the points, the teachings of the Qur'an, we look at the internal harmony and the lack of contradiction between the different notions. That becomes another way to establish the miraculous nature of the Qur'an, and we'll explain that when we get there. Here I just wrote preliminary remarks, simply in case someone wants to kind of situate this topic in the broader field of Islamic sciences. Generally speaking, when people study the Holy Qur'an, they look at it from three big angles. So sometimes those angles are considered as specific sciences, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The first angle you may want to look from at the Holy Qur'an is the angle of recitation. So there's an entire established field in Islamic sciences teaching you how to recite the Holy Qur'an. So on one side there is, let's call it the grammar of recitation. So they teach you how to pronounce every letter depending on the letter that comes before it and after it and. So that's kind of more science of recitation. And then there's another related field that is more the art of reciting it. And this is how do you use your breath and your voice and the intonations and the notes that you can generate with your voice in order to try to raise the meanings of the verses of the Qur'an in the best possible way. So that when someone hears the verses, their mind goes or their heart goes to the different meanings that are being expressed by those verses. That's the point of that art. So that's the art. So all of that falls under the sciences that are generally studied in relation to the recitation of the Holy Qur'an. The second field related to the Holy Qur'an is simply and the most well-established, most popular field, which is tafsir, exegesis or interpretation, commentary of the Holy Qur'an. And the point of that field is simply to try to understand to the extent humanly possible, to the extent possible, what is the meaning behind the verse. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to communicate? What is He trying to teach human beings with the verses? Right? So that's the entire field of commentary and interpretation of the Qur'an. And it is one of the most fascinating fields in Islamic sciences in general, and the one probably that requires the most extensive knowledge to get into, because you basically have to be a scholar in anything and everything related to Islam to be able to understand and interpret the verses of the Qur'an. Okay, so that's very quickly a wrap-up of those two fields. But then we have all sorts of topics, all sorts of questions and issues and themes and subjects related to the Holy Qur'an, but not necessarily to how you recite it, nor do they fall squarely under the general field of tafsir. So for instance, if we want to see when was the Qur'an compiled, and how was it compiled, who are the people involved, what is this whole science of, they say, qira'at. So is there only one way to recite, to read, to pronounce the words and the verses of the Holy Qur'an, or are there more than one? If you go back in history, you'll see that it seems that there were causes, there were circumstances and contexts which led to certain verses being revealed. That's an entire field. Why was a verse revealed? What was the context, the socio-cultural, historical context out of which a certain verse was revealed? That's a whole field on its own. There's an entire field related to, are there any verses in the Qur'an that have been abrogated, that have been nullified or cancelled out by other verses, so that whatever was supposed to be in effect is no longer in effect because of another verse that comes and said, okay, the law was this, now the law has changed because of whatever contextual change, therefore that law no longer applies, or that verse is no longer in effect. That's another field. And so on and so forth, including one of those fields, which is the entire topic related to the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. That's the reason I'm mentioning it. So that you're situated in this these topics on their own, they've been all lumped up together, gathered together under one general heading referred to as Ulum al-Qur'an. Okay, so if you want ever to study all those topics related to the Qur'an, but they're not squarely falling under tafsir, which, you know, in the classic meaning of tafsir, you take the first verse of the Holy Qur'an and you follow the order as it appears in the Qur'an and you try to understand its meaning. And of course, inshallah, one day we'll get into how tafsir is done, and you know, there are different ways of doing tafsir. There's thematic or topical tafsir, and there is, you know, orderly tafsir, and you can follow the chronology of revelation, you can follow the order in which it appears in the Qur'an today, and so on and so forth. But what about all these other topics? So all these other topics have been lumped together in this one big field called Quranic sciences. The sciences of the Qur'an, or Quranic sciences. Okay, so Ulum al-Qur'an. So all these questions and all become kind of sub-sciences. You can specialize in these different fields and study them in depth if you wanted to. There are entire books of multiple volumes written about this whole topic, this whole field of Ulum al-Qur'an. If you go back in history, for instance, there's a scholar by the name of Zarkashi. When he wrote about Ulum al-Qur'an, he said that it contains 47 sciences. Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, when he wrote much later, he said that the fields or the sub-sciences of Ulum al-Qur'an are about 80. There's 80 fields. And of course, so depending on how you cut them up or but just to say how extensive that research and that area is, and usually the scholars who specialize in this field, they need to specialize in this field, because that's a lifetime and that's a very deep, very broad and very deep topic to specialize in. But it's fascinating. Any case, so keeping all that in mind, it's basically, I'm saying all of this in case any of you are more interested in the topics that we're discussing today, as well as the next lesson, which has to do with the authenticity of the Holy Qur'an. How do we ensure that what we are reading today is actually what was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, and what about the order, and what about all these subtopics that we mentioned quickly, the qira'at and so on and so forth. So these two topics would both be studied under this general heading of Ulum al-Qur'an. So anyone who is more interested in delving in depth there, that's where you would find the detailed discussions and the detailed study. So now let's go back to our topic. So kind of continuing off where we left off last time, when we talked a little bit about other scriptures. When we look at the Holy Qur'an, we see that, to our knowledge at least, it's the only book that comes with its challenge. So the Holy Qur'an not only contains the teachings of Islam, so it's not only the scripture part, it's not only the revelation part that you would also find in previous scriptures, but it also comes with a challenge. It openly states in the Holy Qur'an, it doesn't just say that this book is a book of guidance, that these are the teachings of God that you must follow. For this part, same thing as any other scripture, same as any other revelation. But then it adds that the manner in which these teachings and this guidance is being expressed to people is exceptional. And in fact, it's so exceptional that I dare you all to try to imitate it. And you will never be able to imitate it. And so the Holy Qur'an comes with not only the content part of it, which is, here are the teachings, here's what you need for your guidance, but it comes with a challenge, which tells us that this becomes the miracle. And we talked a little bit about this challenge function in miracles when we talked about general prophethood. We said the point of the miracle is to establish that this is really sent by God. So in the case of the Holy Qur'an is not only the teachings, the points, and the content, but it's also the miraculous nature of it. Because it could have been expressed in a different language, in a normal language, as were previous revelations, previous scriptures. In this case, it wasn't. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about a little bit, touching on the topic today, the nature of this miraculousness in the Holy Qur'an. But that's to start with. So we have verses in the Holy Qur'an that are very broad and very generic, simply saying, if you can, try to imitate it, But we promise you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I promise you, this is not imitable. You cannot duplicate this. And then, when it became an open confrontation and people were rejecting the message, were rejecting the claim to prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, then we started getting much more specific challenges from the Holy Qur'an. So the Holy Qur'an at first said, if you can, try to match the entire Qur'an. And then it says, okay, well, we know you can't match the whole Qur'an, so we're going to make it a little bit easier on you. Why don't you try to match 10 verses, 10 surah, 10 chapters of the Qur'an? And then the Holy Qur'an went one level lower, and he said, forget 10 chapters. Why don't you try to match a single chapter? And we know that there are chapters in the Qur'an which could be written in one line, right? Surah Al-Asr, Surah Al-Kawthar, Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad. It's one line, it's 3 verses. It's a few words, 10 words, right? That's the entire chapter. So there is something that is being said as a challenge in the Qur'an when it says, try to imitate the chapter if you can, even though that chapter may be only one line, and the Arabs of that time understood that as a challenge, and they knew that they had been defeated with that challenge. And this started with the revelation of the Qur'an at that time, and it has remained in position. The Holy Qur'an had said, and let anyone who wants to try to raise to the occasion, try to provide something that matches this challenge. Someone who can come up with anything that matches the Holy Qur'an entirely, or only 10 of its chapters, or a single one of its chapters. This has been now 14 centuries. Okay, so there is the situation as it happened, as it was revealed. That's one part of the argument and one part of the study. And another part that requires study is, so what has happened since then? Has no one really been able to come up with any way to counter this and to come up with something that says, okay, I matched it, therefore it's not of a divine source? It's as simple as that. And so here is kind of the argument, is that my claim, me being Prophet Muhammad, my claim is that I'm sent from God, and God has given me, and this is another topic that we said we're not going to get into, a number of miracles. Let's put all of those aside. Let's say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me this as my miracle, the Holy Qur'an. So either you accept the challenge and you defeat it somehow, and if you cannot, then my challenge stands, and you have to accept that I am actually sent as a prophet from God, and you must therefore follow the teachings that are in this book, in this revelation. That's in general the argument. And as we said today, I mean, anyone who looks, and we can get into a little bit more detail a little bit later on, but the situation against the man himself, and then against his teachings, and against his religion, and against this book, has been very clear from day one. There are those who accept, and there are those who are neutral, and there are those who have an open enmity, right, towards and against the man and his teachings and this book. So until now, what we're saying is, and now you've had 14 centuries and counting. So how have you not been able to come up with anything to discredit this? Yeah.
Said I listened to last week's lecture, and comparing to how you're describing the Quran here, when you're describing the Old Testament, and you mentioned those verses, controversial verses, I guess you call them, as proofs that were used to discredit the authenticity of these books. I'm just curious as to, like, I don't know if you know, how would, like, people who believe in that scripture defend that text of adultery, of intoxication, of incest, of fighting with God, of etc.
Yeah.
How could those
that's the
be
normal,
defended?
Yeah, so that's the normal figure of God and those prophets. Like, it's considered, they actually, those who have tried, like in more modern times, I'm not going to go into, like, that's a really big topic, but in general, what they try to say is, this is supposed to show you the very human nature of the prophets. There are people like you and me, all of them sin, all of them, the only thing is, according to that ideology is, do you accept the covenant of God or not? And if you do, that's all you need. And to be honest, I mean, even in Islamic different
That's
schools
what
of
it is.
thought, we do have people who believe in all sorts of, within Islam, there are people who believe that prophets are no different than you and I. The only difference is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala randomly chose someone for whatever reason, but there's no real distinction, there's no moral distinction, there's no ontological, real, existential distinction between that person and me. He could have flipped the equation and I could have been the prophet, and he would have been the one listening to me and following me and obeying. And if you understand how Quraysh were dealing with the prophet to a large extent, that was their main argument. They didn't see him in himself as being anything special. He's just a man. They understood that he was, of a very good conduct and so on and so forth, but they would not lower themselves to the point to have the humility to think there's actually a human being better than me. So what is it that gives you the right to become a prophet and not me? If there's such a thing as a prophethood, then I should have been made a prophet. And to a large extent, it seems from the Holy Qur'an and from certain historical and narrational sources, it seems this is how the rabbis dealt with their prophets in Bani Israel too. And this is why the alterations were made into the scriptures. It's the same logic. It's if there is such a thing as Allah sending messengers and prophets, then who's more deserving than me? I've spent my life, studying religion, understanding it, and I have the wealth, or I have the, the status, or I have whatever I consider to be the criteria to be, the nobility of that society. And remember the verses, let's say, of Talut, for instance, when they asked for their prophet to send them someone to lead them into war, Bani Israel, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them Talut, they refused. And they said, well, we have more money than him, and we have more children than him. How can he be the king? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers saying, these are not the criteria God uses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's criteria in this case, because you need someone to lead you into war, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent you someone with two traits. He has knowledge and he has bodily strength, physical strength. And this is what you need in this at this time from your leader, right? So this is a problem. People want to impose a criteria, and they will go as far as distorting the image of God, the image of prophets, and we have the same thing in our
So say they
history.
don't defend it because their definition is
It's fine.
It's fine for them because of the.
But then we say it completely makes the entire philosophy of religion crumble. If this is your prophet, and if this is the figure that you are to emulate and to follow in your life, this is the person that you consider to be your guide to God, the whole thing crumbles. This is what we talked about in general prophethood. Yes.
Quickly send.
Maybe it'd be hard for any of us here to understand how a Christian or a Jewish person could accept that text. But like you said in the hadith you mentioned months ago, even within Islamic scriptures, with the Prophet being suicidal, that's accepted with 90% of Muslims.
Yeah.
And the explanation they give is the exact one that the like a Christian or Jew would believe, that he's a human,
Yeah.
and he has sins.
And
he
Allah
has
subhanahu wa
mistakes.
ta'ala
So
develops him this way.
it makes
That's
it
how they
easier
say.
for us to understand how they would believe it, because even Muslims themselves
Some
fall
Muslims,
victims,
yeah.
I don't want to say, but even have the same understanding of the Prophet,
Yeah.
where they believe he's just a man.
Yeah, or someone, for instance, go back and review, let's say, the different interpretations, commentary on Surah Abasa wa Tawalla. Right? Who is it the man who frowned? Was it really Prophet Muhammad?
Yes.
And this is a simple one. There's a lot worse in the Quran, but this one is well famous. Okay, so
They'll
yes.
say that it was God's hikmah. I've been told this personally, that it was God's hikmah to teach us through the Prophet's mistakes.
Yes, exactly.
And so then I sat there and I thought to myself, well then God could have, instead of giving us a perfect individual, given us a completely imperfect individual, and we could have learned from their life because it was all mistakes.
And so they took that, your kind of like devil's advocate argument, and they made that into their ideological belief system, which is God did take these imperfect people, and He did make them into the prophets, to show you and to show all of us that they're just humans like you and I. They sin, they make mistakes, they err, and that's fine. So therefore, there's hope for all of us. All of us can aspire to that. when this is a complete distortion of how it should be. Because by doing that, for whatever reason, and there are reasons, by doing that you're completely dismantling the entire philosophy of having a religion. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what we talked about when we said, why do we need a religion, and why do we need a revelation, and why do we need people carrying that to human beings? The moment you show that there's a weakness, there's a gap, there's a mistake or an error in the revelation or the person carrying it, that's it, you have no religion. What's the difference between that and whatever I sit in my basement at night and create, and I say, okay, this is a religion. I made it up, and it looks good, and it's consistent. What's the difference between that and what's sent to me from God? It needs to be infallible. It needs to guarantee my guidance. And if it doesn't, then all of them are the same. They're human generated, they're human made. And what we're looking for, that's why we said, the purpose of our existence is to go back to God. If God does not give me a way to go back to Him, then there's a problem in the way He created us. I can go back to God and say, well, you gave me no way to come back to you. You gave me all of this, and look at it, it's a mess. Am I supposed to follow this person? Look at them and what they do. Look at that person and their manners. Look at this person and what they did. These are supposed to be my guides. I'm better than them. And you want me to take my teachings from them? That's the issue, right? So this is what we tried in one way or another to establish in general prophethood. So now we're trying to apply all of this. Excellent questions. Now we're trying to apply this to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So as we said, there are challenges in the Qur'an that basically say, try to duplicate it entirely, or duplicate 10 of its chapters, or duplicate one of its chapters. And if you cannot, and you will not, then you must accept that this message has actually been revealed from God. The origin of this message is God. And therefore, I am the messenger of God, and these are His teachings to you. Okay, so that's the argument. So if we go back to the Holy Qur'an, these are some verses that establish this. So if you need the references in the Qur'an, so in Surah Al-Isra, say, should all human beings and jinn rally together to bring the like of this Qur'an, they will not bring the like of it, even if they assisted one another. And there's another verse here, there's another interpretation that basically says, even if they basically helped each other over generations. وَلَوْ كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ ظَهِيرًا. So basically, if they use all of the time that they have as a species, so over thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, and they worked continuously, all of them together, each generation giving to the next what they worked on, all of this together would not amount to a book like the Holy Quran. Okay, so that's a challenge. So if you understand that, you see like it's open, it's unambiguous, right? It's very clear, it's an open challenge. And in the second verse here we have, do they say he has fabricated it? So the Holy Quran is talking to the Holy Prophet. And this is of course, like inshallah one day we give some, we discuss more tafsir and interpretation, we notice how the Quran talks. But since this is a lesson about the miraculous nature of the Quran, maybe I just mention it quickly. See, the verse does not honor those disbelievers enough to speak to them. The Arabs, they understand this intuitively. So they understand the rhetoric of the Quran. We need someone to explain it to us. So if you see the verse, the first one when it says قُلْ, why does the Holy Quran only talk to the Prophet? Why does it address the Prophet? Because he's worthy of being spoken to. As for the disbelievers, the Quran doesn't talk to them. The believers, the Quran talks to them directly. It tells them, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you have believed, O you who have believed. When it's talking to human beings as a species in general, it says, Ya ayyuha nas, no problem. But as a disbeliever, so in this case, it doesn't give them enough honor. It doesn't value them enough to talk to them directly. It doesn't say, why do you say that? Yes. It says, do they say, so it talks to the Holy Prophet, it addresses the Prophet, but it makes them, it's basically about them. So it says, do they say he has fabricated it? Say then bring 10 surahs like it. Fabricate it. And invoke whomever you can besides Allah, should you be truthful. And then in the next verse, so here we had 10 chapters, 10 surah. In the next one, do they say he has fabricated it? Say, then bring a surah like it, a single one, like it, and invoke whomever you can besides Allah, should you be truthful. And if you go to Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, and if you are in doubt concerning what we have sent down to our servant, then bring a surah like it and invoke your helpers beside Allah should you be truthful. And this is the argument that you don't feel, it's kind of implied in the previous verses, here it's open. And if you do not, and you will not, then beware the fire whose fuel will be humans and stones, prepared for the disbelievers. So basically you're openly confronting God. So you know that this can only be sent from God, and you are openly challenging God. If that's the case, then prepare for His punishment. Okay, so that's the argument. So as we said, if we go back to the time of the Holy Prophet, and I mean this is just a very well-known history. If you study the life of the Holy Prophet even before his mission began, if you study his life very carefully, you see that there were multiple assassination attempts on his life. Okay, so that should be a topic on its own. Why? Because there were people who started to notice how the personality of this person, of this man, the family from which he comes, the manner in which he conducts himself, are starting to match very closely to what is in the scriptures of the Jews and the Christians of a prophet who is going to be announced. And that's why there were assassination attempts against the life of the Holy Prophet before he was a prophet. Because they recognized him. And they started to see that this is going to be the person who's going to become the prophet. His signs, his descriptors, his traits are too clear to them. But anyways, let's consider that a kind of an esoteric topic that requires extensive study, and inshallah one day we can do that. Put all of that aside. Let's start from the moment he starts to openly say, I'm a prophet of God, his mission begins. From that moment on, he has been at war. So the moment he said, it wasn't easy. People didn't just flock to him and accept his message right away. It was one struggle after another, one difficulty after another. It's an uphill battle. So they tried to kill him, they tried to dissuade him, to convince him to take money or to take bribes or to leave the Arabian Peninsula, or at least leave Mecca and where the big tribes of Quraysh and others were living. Just get out of here, stop ruining our religion, stop ruining our socioeconomic status, just leave. And then when that stopped working, and there were all sorts of means put in place, then they started to use much more aggressive means to try to stop him and stop anyone following him. There was torture, people were assassinated, were killed, and then it became an open war. And this began at that time, at the time of the Holy Prophet, and it went all the way to the moment he died. Right? So the open confrontation, there was never a moment where it was all good and easy, and there was always an open enemy. When Islam became powerful and strong, and so it was surrounded by other empires too. And the Prophet basically towards the end of his life was the king of the Arabs. The Arabs who are now suddenly starting to emerge as a kind of a civilization when not a generation ago they were nothing. No one even cared about them. The Persians, the Persian Empire, and the Romans from the north and the south and the east, no one cared about the Arabs. No one wants to even bother with them. They live in deserted lands, barren, there's nothing there, it's difficult, and they're illiterate, and no one cares about them. They don't constitute a threat to anyone. And now, a generation later, which is the speed of light in history, if you look at how slowly things are supposed to emerge, within one generation, 23 years between the time he begins his mission and the time he passes away, now they're starting to emerge. And if you study very carefully the life of Muawiyah and the alliances that he was starting to make with the Romans of the time, and how the Holy Qur'an talked about how there's going to the war between the Persians and the Romans, غُلِبَتُ الرُّوم, in the beginning of Surah Rum, it says the Romans are going to be defeated, which seemed like a completely wild dream when the verses were revealed. The Romans, they are the superpower of the day, of the Qur'an, which is part of the prophecies of the Qur'an, says the Romans have been defeated years before. Okay, غُلِبَتُ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ. Anyways, so all of that to say, when you look at this, the history of the life of Prophet Muhammad, and the moment that the Qur'an started to be revealed, there has been an open enmity and war situation against it from day one. So what you would expect is that someone would try to seize this. You know what? The Qur'an is claiming that it is inimitable. Well, let me show them, and if that's all it takes for people to stop believing and to stop entering into this religion, then let me do it. So enormous manpower, enormous resources have been put into trying to do this over history, during history. And this began with the time of the Holy Prophet, and it went on over the next generations. And we'll mention a couple of examples. And today the situation is no different. And you have entire organizations dedicated today, entire authors, whose entire mission is to show that the Holy Qur'an is a copy of other scriptures, that Prophet Muhammad had access to other books, that he was taking and duplicating and adapting and modifying to make it his own, and so on and so forth. Anything that goes in that direction can be considered a form of someone going in this direction and trying to openly accept that challenge, or indirectly accept that challenge, of showing that in fact it is not inimitable. You can duplicate it, or you can duplicate parts of it. And even though I can't, which is the majority of what people do today, the researchers attacking the Qur'an one way or another, even though I can't, it's still a human thing, and Muhammad did. He created it, he fabricated it, as we read in the verses, and the claim has remained in place until now, and it continues. People like Ibn Warraq and others continue to, they generate a whole lot of content, basically all saying, the Arabic is not really Arabic, it's taken from Syriac or Aramaic, or they go back to older scriptures to see, and there's an issue, like major issue with all of this, each one of these points that require, extensive studies, but this is always ongoing. When we look at that, our claim is anyone who looks at the history of the Holy Quran, who understands the life of Prophet Muhammad from the beginning until now, our claim is that an objective researcher, anyone who looks at the history of the Quran from the beginning when it was revealed until today, will say that the challenge has not been met. No one has succeeded in duplicating the Quran or 10 chapters or a single chapter of the Quran, even if it were to be one line. This has not happened yet. Okay? Which means, long story short, which means that the book is exceptional, it is inimitable, and it is miraculous. And so when it says about itself, I am the miracle, then it is a miracle. And here, it's a reminder quickly of things that we said when we spoke about the general prophethood, those arguments. We said that a miracle is going to break with the natural order of things. So someone who studies the Quran carefully, you have to see, is it possible for someone like Prophet Muhammad to write a book like the Quran or not? Does this follow the natural order of things or not? And our claim is that absolutely it is not. That's one. Two is, can anyone duplicate it? So this is what we see with any miracle. When Prophet Musa throws his cane and it becomes a viper or a serpent or a snake, is that something that you can duplicate or not? The same rules, the same criteria apply. And the same thing with the third one, presented with a claim to establish prophethood. So when someone says, I am going to put this forward as a miracle to establish my prophethood, then this is where you have to take it in that light. It's not, is it something that breaks away with the laws of nature? It's, does it actually establish their prophethood? And if that's the claim, then that's what you get at the end, unless you can show that it was a false claim. Okay? So when we apply this objectively to the Quran, the only logical conclusion should be that this is actually a book whose source is divine, whose source is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we put all of this together today, we say that the best proof that we have for the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, if anyone is looking for something, is to say it's the Holy Quran. Of course we can study his life, of course we can study his manners, but that all falls under history. And history is history. It's written by people and it's analyzed and it's distorted, and so you have to study it as though it's a historical account, which has its own problems. So what's left? What's left is the only thing that we say has been unaltered, not changed, as is. As it was revealed then, it is in our hands today. And this is inshallah going to be the topic of the next lesson, which is how do we ensure that this is actually the same book, from cover to cover, okay? So with that, we establish two things. That this is actually a book that establishes the prophethood of the man, Muhammad, with everything that is included in there, one. And two, that it has a divine origin. So on its own, as a standalone, as well as supporting the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad. So these are kind of two topics. They're related, but they're two topics. And for all, basically I'm adding a point here that it's a great blessing, because when you hear about the miracle of any other prophet, you don't have access to it. We know that Prophet Isa alayhi salam, Prophet Jesus, healed the sick and the ill, or he raised people from the dead. I don't have it in front of me today. If someone is skeptical, they have doubt, what do I do? The only thing I can say is, trust me, it happened. With the Holy Qur'an, I don't need to do that. There's no trust me, it happened, or rely on me. I assure you that you can, believe me when I say it. I just take the Qur'an and give it to them. And I say, go study it on your own and come up with your own conclusion. That's the difference. So the aspects of the miraculous nature of the Qur'an, as we said, there are three presented in the lesson. The first one, the eloquence and the rhetoric of the Qur'an. So in general, the purpose of the Holy Qur'an is obviously to convey a specific message. In the case of the Qur'an, the message itself can be studied. So I study what is it actually saying, the content, and I study how was it said. And our claim, and inshallah we'll talk about that today, and anyone who studies the Qur'an should come to that conclusion, that it's miraculous in both. The manner in which the message was given is miraculous, and the message itself was miraculous. Okay, so in general, that's what we're saying. So the manner in which it was given is what's mentioned in point 1, which is the eloquence and the rhetoric, al-balagha, al-fasaha. This is what the Arabs of the time understood, and they intuitively understood that this is miraculous. And we'll go over a couple of examples here. So the structure, the wording, the rhythm, the manner in which the message is conveyed, the how, and then the what, the message itself. And here I wrote a few things. Each one of these that I wrote, there's entire volumes of studies written about them. Okay, so you have, for instance, the word choice. Why does the Qur'an choose a word instead of another? And entire schools of thought have been built on this. Because there are some scholars who believe that the Qur'an does use synonyms, and other scholars who say the Qur'an does not use synonyms. So when it says Al-Kitab, and it says Al-Qur'an, and it says Al-Furqan, and it says Al-Dhikr, and it says, these are not synonyms. If the Qur'an says Al-Qur'an, it's referring to an aspect, which in that verse is the one that is being referred to. That's why the Qur'an did not say Al-Kitab here, it said Al-Qur'an. In another verse it said Al-Kitab. In another verse it said Al-Furqan. Okay? Other scholars say no, there are synonyms in the Qur'an. That's an entire field. But if you keep that in mind, and this is the surprising part is you think that these are easy claims, but when you see the amount of volumes written about them, and how an entire school of thought has been raised with scholars over generations, bringing consistently new content and supported evidence from the Qur'an for this, you see that there is enough in the Qur'an to justify the claim and to take it seriously.
Sayyid, can non-Arabic speaking people relate to this, or is it like in other language like English, it's very different grammatically or something?
To some extent, the notions are the same. The difference is Arabic, the richness of the Arabic language is unmatched by anything close to it. The amount of roots that you have in the Arabic language when you compare it to other languages, and this is where you start seeing the richness, the depth of the language and the tools that it has at its disposal to work with, it's not comparable. Like you're talking to maybe like 1% or 2% or 3% of what you find in Arabic, you might find in the most.
So studying the Quran in English
is
will not
very
give you-
problematic.
Okay.
Very, very problematic. If someone wants any level of like serious understanding, they need to spend a little bit of time trying to understand Arabic. You have to. You can understand, you can only go so far without actually starting to read Arabic and make up your own mind about the roots, the constructions of the words, the constructions, like there's ellipsis and ellipsis, for instance. This is when a word in the Qur'an decides to drop a letter or add a letter. And it may add a meaning or remove a meaning or an aspect of the meaning or the connotation of a word. So this is like they say in linguistics, they call it denotation, which is the factual meaning of a word. And then you have the connotation, which is what is socially understood from a word, even though it may not be in the dictionary. And we talked about that a little bit when we started the lessons, over a year ago, when we said, for instance, if you hear the word ideology, and that's why we objected to the use of the term ideology in the lesson, we said because it has a negative connotation with it today. Even though ideology in the sense is just, the set of beliefs and axioms that you put together to form the worldview, that part is the factual part, but there's a connotation because of the history of the word and who used it and how they used it. Well, the Qur'an does that too. So it understands how the words are to be understood, and this is a psychological dimension. So how, as a non-speaker, as a non-Arabic speaker, are you going to get to that? You need to spend time to get to the depth of this, and that's why it's very difficult to translate. What you're doing when you're translating is choosing a meaning based on what you're understanding, and sometimes when you read it, there's 3 or 4 or 7 different possible meanings, and you don't have an objective reason to choose one over the other. But you have to, because you cannot replicate the 7 meanings with a one English term, let's say, or a French term, or a Russian term. So each one of these would build a completely different construction. And I will give you an example because I'm forced to a little bit later in the lesson. I'll give you an example. So word choice, the construction of the parts of the verses, the terminology. So the Quran has its own terminology. It uses words in a very specialized way. It means something in the Quran that may or may not match even what you find in the Hadith. And it's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to introduce a new vocabulary for people to work with. So the Quran has its own vocabulary. That's a terminology. The expression, so that's the expressivity. So to what extent, and this is why I linked it to the imagination, the imaginative power of the Quran. When you read the verse and you understand what it's saying, how much does it generate? How much depth does it generate in you? And this is where you see, is it a rich manner in which you're expressing the thought, or is it superficial and one dimension? And this is very important because it would mean, and we'll talk about that inshallah in 3 to 4 lessons, in 3 lessons, it means that when human beings will come later with their own intellectual baggage, with their own background and understanding of the world, they will be able to extract new meanings from the terms. Because the terms give you that possibility themselves. And if it was unidimensional, whether it was written 14 centuries ago or today, everybody would understand the same thing. But the Quran opens that door so that you keep adding layers of meaning. Because of the way it's worded, because of the choices that it has made. So the style, the connotation, textual context, the grammar, the repetition, the use of repetition, the use of metaphors, the pauses in the Quran where they are, the intonation. So all of this is very important. If you study a surah like Al-Waqi'ah, for instance, the manner in which the words were chosen, they reflect the meaning. So many studies have been written about this. Al-Waqi'ah, even if you do not understand the terminology, the Arabic meaning, or Al-Qari'ah, you understand that there's a very powerful word being said, and it becomes one of the terms that the Quran uses to talk about the arrival of the hour, or the afterlife, or the day of judgment, right? إذا وقعت الواقعة or الحاقة القارعة, right? And anyways, so that's the intonation and religion, ellipsis, phonetics, pragmatics. So pragmatics is what it makes you want to do when you hear it. And there are verses of the Quran even that talk about this. What happens to some people when they hear the words of the Quran? So if you are a believer, they say that you get goosebumps basically. تَقْشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ. Right? You basically get goosebumps. You feel it on your skin. Or if it were to be revealed on a mountain, that it would break into pieces. Why? So it's saying the manner in which the words and the sounds have been put together actually has a physical effect if you open yourself to it. And right now, I don't know if you follow this or not on YouTube, these videos go viral of people who don't understand Arabic who are made to listen to the Qur'an, and they react. A lot of them react. A lot of people cry, a lot of people just become speechless, and there's a lot of videos, and it's some theme that seems to be going viral. So anyways, that all falls under that general heading and topic. Yeah.
You said, for example, those words that, for example, فَدَمْدَمَ عَلَيْهِمْ, those words that actually, without even understanding the significance of the word, you actually understand what it's talking about.
Exactly.
How would you call that in English? What is the word that you could say? Is it?
There is no match like this. When let's say there's a sound that is made,
Yeah.
and there's a repetition, I don't know. To say, for instance, the woof of a dog. So you're kind of replicating the natural sound with the word. You don't need to call it that, but you call it that because that's what it really sounds like. Okay, so this is usually called onomatopoeia in English. Yeah. Okay, so you can go look it up.
Yeah.
So damdama might fall under that category. Okay, but in Arabic you have the flexibility of actually creating words. You can construct the word in this way, and the Qur'an does. Okay, so damma or damdama will become like a whole. You can decline the word based on Arabic grammar and syntax, based on the root of the word. So depending if it's the majority of the roots are 3 letters, but you can have 4, you can have 2, and so on and so forth, Semitic languages. Good question, but too specialized. Requires complete knowledge of the language. So of course here, to fully appreciate, and that's what we were saying, we need to understand the language. And the more you understand, the more you're going to appreciate this miraculous nature. Yet, and this is the next point, it should be experienced by anyone who understands Arabic. So this has always been the claim of the Qur'an, that while the more you know, the more you're going to appreciate, understanding Arabic in general should allow you to feel something when you hear the Qur'an. If you take certain verses of the Qur'an talking about a topic, and other verses of the Qur'an talking about another topic, take verses that are talking about specific laws, let's say laws of inheritance, verses talking about giving you the story of Prophet Musa or Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, you'll see that the intonation and the rhythm and the pace and all of that is reflected in the manner in which the story is expressed. Completely different than how it's said when it's laws. Completely different when it's talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah, where usually it's very short verses and they go very fast to give you the feeling of what's actually happening and how fast it's happening, for instance. Okay, so all of that to keep in mind. And so basically, when we put all of this together, we say that generally speaking, this would be beyond the capacity of a single human being to put together in this way. Okay, so that's the argument. The next point is to go from there to say it's between making the jump between saying this is something exceptional to saying this is something miraculous. This is where we say you actually need expertise. And the truth is, even today, unless you spend your whole life studying one or two of these aspects, this is something that's kind of a lost art. Someone who intuitively understands that this is miraculous, that it cannot come from a human being, this is lost. This is a lost art. You have to sit and study, and there are people who are writing volumes and creating, apps and software to do statistical research and explain what the Qur'an is saying and how it's using the verbs or using the nouns or adjectives or so on and so forth. But they're using all sorts of tools because this intuitive appreciation of the Arabic language, no one today can match what the Arabs surrounding the life of the Holy Prophet had in terms of mastery of the Arabic language. So they understood it right away as a miracle. And that was the purpose for them. To them, the Holy Prophet did not need to tell them the nature of this Qur'an is miraculous in its expression, because they got that intuitively. So what did he emphasize on? He emphasized that its content, you need to sit and ponder and study, which is the other type of its miraculousness. The content, besides the expression, yes, the expression is a miracle, but the content is a miracle too. So the teachings that are contained in it, the systems that it presents to you, are also miraculous.
Content tafsir or what are you talking about? What do you mean by content?
So when for instance a verse says, you need to take care of the weak or the orphans or the widows in your society, that's the content, the teachings, not how it's said. Yeah. The how is miraculous, and they understood that intuitively, right away. They heard it and they knew, and we're going to give examples of that. But the Holy Prophet wanted them to concentrate on the content too, which sometimes when we say al-batin, when you hear about the batin, well, that's the first layer. Al-batin is the content. It's what is it actually saying, not the words, beyond the words. What is it saying? It's the meaning or the meanings of the Quran. So here's the question. So why was this miracle chosen for Islam? And this is a very big topic, and we're not going to get into it, and it's not addressed in the lesson. But generally speaking, we touched on this, and we're going to touch on it again very quickly. Ibn al-Sikit, who was a scholar who came to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, and who asked about this. He told him, how come Prophet Musa alayhi salam was sent with al-asa, was sent with the cane that became the snake? How come that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was sent with the miracle to heal people and raise them from the dead? And how come Prophet Muhammad was sent with the Qur'an? And Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam tells him, every prophet was sent to the people of his time with whatever was needed and considered the highest level of specialization and expertise. And that's why you need the experts of that world to tell you if it's a miracle or not. To the people watching, to the commoners watching Prophet Musa throw his cane and it becomes a snake, they can't distinguish between whether this is magic or this is a miracle. But who can distinguish? The magicians. The magicians who stood in front of Prophet Musa alayhi salam can tell. They knew what magic can and can't do, and then they saw what this is doing. And right away, they believed immediately when they saw it, because they're experts. This is where you need the expertise. The same thing with Prophet Isa alayhi salam. You can be the best medical doctor, physician in the world, and you can do all sorts of things that the commoners consider to be miracles. But if you are saying this is a miracle, then people better believe this is a miracle, because you know what human capacity is and where it starts and where it stops. And so Imam Hadi alayhi salam is telling him each prophet is being sent to the people of his time with whatever is considered to be the highest level of expertise of their time, so that the experts say this is beyond human capacity. And when Prophet Muhammad was sent, it was the ability of the Arabs and their mastery of the Arabic language. And of course, this opens the door, and we'll mention it later, to Islam being a universal religion, because the miracle is not a temporal miracle, and it's not a physical miracle, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, when we go, given the point that we just said, when we look at this miraculous nature, maybe today I can't. I cannot look at the Qur'an. I cannot spend my whole life studying Arabic and then studying the Qur'an and seeing. So I can go to the experts. And here are a few of the stories. So one of them is Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, they used to call him Rayhanat al-Arab, the basil, the one who is the sweetest smelling, or basically he was an old man considered to be, if not the most eloquent, one of the most eloquent men in the Arab world at that time. Completely against the Holy Prophet, trying to mock him and ridicule him and do anything. He was used as a judge, and people would come to him, the poets would come to him, and they would recite poetry, and he would be the judge on which is the most eloquent and worthy poem to be written in gold, or to be, considered to be, this is the chief of poets at this time, or this is the best piece of poetry at this time. And this man, and I wrote the verses here, if we go back to his life, and this is very well known, very well documented, he stood and he was against the Holy Prophet, and he was saying, this is all a mockery. This man is basically creating all of these fabrications and distortions, and he would mock the Holy Prophet. He was one of the heads of Quraysh mocking the Holy Prophet, and he was very respected, one of the maybe 5 or 6 biggest figures of Quraysh at that time. And he stood and he's about to confront the Holy Prophet, and the Holy Prophet was reciting these verses. So the Holy Prophet, and I wrote them down, of course, not in Arabic, but this is generally speaking what he would have heard. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hamim, descending down of the book from Allah, the Almighty, the All-Knowing. No one disputes the signs of Allah except those who have disbelieved. So do not be misled by their bustle of the town, so their quick movements in the towns. Right? The people of Nuh disbelieved before them, and the factions after them. Every nation conspired against their messenger to seize him, and disputed by means of falsehood to refute the truth. Then I seized them, so how was my retribution? Thus was the word of your Lord proved true against the disbelievers, that they shall be inmates of the fire. The beginning of Surah Al-Ghafir, the first 6 verses of Surah Al-Ghafir. So he went back. They were waiting for him. He went back, and these are very well famous, known. His words themselves are considered a sermon that people recite and they repeat. Okay, إِنَّ عَلَيْهِ لَطَلَاوَةً وَإِنَّ فِيهِ لَحَلَاوَةً, and so on and so forth. So he said, in translation, I swear that I have heard from Muhammad a speech that is neither from the speech of human beings nor from the jinn. It carries a sweetness or a euphoria, and it is covered with grace or with calm. Its summit, so the highest parts of it, its summits bear fruits, and its root is heavily drenched. So he's giving the metaphor of a tree. And it is transcending or very high, and it can never be outdone. So they told him, so what has happened to you, Walid? Like you just went to refute him and to discredit him and to show that this is all a fabrication and a lie. What do we say? He told them, well, the Arabs are going to flock to you from all over the lands because it was the season right before the pilgrimage. There's Suq Akab, as they call it. There was kind of a marketplace that everybody gathered where they did commercial transactions and so on and so forth. So he told them, when they come, make sure to tell them that he is a sorcerer. Okay, so the Holy Qur'an has many verses that talk about him, because he was one of those people, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, who knew exactly what the Qur'an was. He realized it, and if you read his words here, he is openly saying, no human being can replicate this. This is from God. But I will never believe that this is from God, and I do not let people hear him. Tell them that he is going to use this spell, and they will be under his spell if they hear him. So he is a sorcerer. Tell them he's a sorcerer. And don't let them get near him, because people are going to flock to you, Arabs, from all over the place. Okay, so this was Al-Walid. The next story, I believe, was from Utbah. Utbah ibn Rabi'a was also one of these 4 or 5 people considered the top figures of Quraysh at that time. And his story happened right after they started bothering the Prophet, and they threw filth at him, and then they tried to humiliate him and be condescending towards him. And his uncle Al-Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib was outside. He was on a hunt. When he came back and he heard, he went inside, and they were sitting inside near the Kaaba, and he went inside and he threatened all of them, saying that if anyone would ever do anything again against his nephew, that he would deal with them himself. And he was very feared. He was a valiant warrior. Everybody did not want to kind of have him as an enemy. So they tried to push him in another way, and they told him, well, are you a believer yourself? And they were surprised when he openly said, yes, I'm a believer in him. So this started changing the equation. Now the Prophet started to have people who are considered powerful and respected. So you have Abu Talib, for instance, or others not openly saying, we are with him, we are not with him. But now you have Al-Hamza who openly said, I am with him. So Al-Utbah came. He talked to Quraysh. He told them, look, I'm going to try to go talk to the Prophet, and I'm going to make him a deal. I'm going to try to convince him and offer him things. So he came to the Prophet and he told him, you are one of us. You are really good. You grew up amongst us. We consider you our son. And now we have seen everything that you're doing. So you have completely humiliated, you have completely destroyed our religion and our faith, and completely disrespected our gods. And you are changing everything upside down in our culture. We're going to let all of that go. And then he basically tried to bribe him. We'll give you money, we'll give you prestige, we'll give you social status, we'll give you... So he let him talk. The Holy Prophet told him, he called him by his nickname, Abu Walid. He told him, talk, Abu Walid, tell me what you have to say. Because the Prophet was praying. As soon as he finished, he came to see him. He told him, I have an offer for you. So he talked, he said, will you listen? He's like, of course, talk, Abu Walid, tell me. So he said all of this, And when he was done, the Holy Prophet told him, Abu Walid, you have spoken, now hear my answer. But the Prophet didn't say anything. All he did was recite verses from the Quran. He recited verses from Surah Fussilat. And here are the beginning, but he kept reading until, if you read Surah Fussilat, you'll see there's a sajda. So we are told in the narrations he recited until the ayah of the sajda in Surah Fussilat. So he said, Hamim, the sending down from the All-Beneficent, the All-Merciful, a book whose signs have been explained in detail, an Arabic Qur'an for a people who have knowledge, a bearer of good news and a warner. But most of them turn away so they do not hear. And they say our hearts are in veils, which shut them off from what you invite us, and there is a deafness in our ears, and there is a curtain between us and you, so do you as you will, we too are doing. Say, I am just a human being like you, but it is revealed to me that your God is one. And he continued to recite the verses. So when they saw him coming back to them, Al-Walid started coming back, they started saying between themselves, he's not looking like he was looking when he went. He was full of energy, he was ready to confront Muhammad and to offer him something and to bribe him and get this over with, and now he's coming back with a completely different face. And when you read the narration, when it describes all of this, it basically tells us he sat and the Holy Prophet was sitting on his prayer as though he was in a prayer position in front of the Kaaba when he was talking to him, and the man sat with both hands behind his back and his mouth was open and he was unable to move because of what the verses and the words were doing to him. Okay, and he knew. He was one of the, as we said, one of the most eloquent people in that world. So when he went back, they told him, Ma wara'ak, so what have you found? He told them, by God, I have just heard a speech, the likes of which I have never heard. I swear by God that it is not poetry, nor magic spells, nor demonic incantations. O Quraysh, listen to me and take it from me. Leave this man alone with whatever is happening to him and do not go near him. I swear that the speech that I heard will become a great thing in the future. So if the Arabs kill him, then you will be spared. So you don't have to confront him, basically. And if he beats them, then his kingdom is your kingdom. So he's your son. He's the son of Quraysh. So his kingdom is your kingdom. And his might is your might. And you shall be the happiest of all people because of him. So he's not telling them to believe. He's telling them, let him do whatever he's saying. Just don't confront him and be an open war with him. Okay? And so they told him, basically, he put a spell on you. The spell that he has put on the rest of his followers, he has put on you. And he told them, you have heard my final opinion. And he left and he sat inside his house for a while. And he wouldn't leave. Yeah.
Should be stopped.
Yeah, I'll just finish this one and I'll stop. I'll go quickly here. Yeah.
My group now too, after beside Utbah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say his story. So the first one is Al-Walid. So his story is in this slide, and the next slide is the story of Utbah. Yeah. And I didn't write the next one. I mean, you can go, there's a lot of stories that you can look up. And then we have all the failed attempts. And in history, there has been many who have claimed and who have tried to imitate the Holy Quran in one way or another. One of the stories is very well known. It actually happened about a century after the Holy Prophet, at the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when Ibn Abil Awja and Ibn al-Muqaffa, Abd al-Malik al-Basri and others, they actually met in the Kaaba in Mecca. And they were not believers. They did not believe there is zanadiq, that they're people, they're heretics. And they decided, and they were considered some of the most eloquent people of their time, and they agreed that each of them is going to go back and to work for the next year on coming up with parts that match the inimitability of the Qur'an, to match the Qur'an, to prove that the Qur'an cannot be from God. And they met 1 year later. And all three of them would look at each other and say, okay, you go, tell me what you have come up with over the year. You had 1 year. And all three of them had absolutely nothing. And they say in the Ruwaya, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam passed by exactly at that moment, and he recited the verse that we recited from Surah Al-Isra, 88, that if human beings and the jinn were to rally together to try to come up with a Qur'an like it, they would never be able to, even if they were to work as helpers of each other or over generations. So these are further support that the experts have openly conceded that they cannot match what's in the Holy Quran. Okay, so that's the point here. The next 2 points, the first one is, and very quickly, and I'll sum it up in 2 minutes, because we talked about it a little bit, the illiteracy of the Holy Prophet. There's a distinction to be made between saying, is the Holy Prophet someone who cannot read and write? We can't really say that. All we can say is, during the 40 years of the Prophet's life, between his birth and the time he started his mission, no one had ever seen him learn how to read and write from anyone. Nor did he learn anything from anyone. 2. 3, he was never seen reading or writing. Given that, when you compare that to a normal human being, you would say this person does not know how to read and write. They are illiterate. Right? It should be very clear. Why is this important yet?
But doesn't the Qur'an address him as an illiterate prophet?
So it says al-ummi, but al-ummi is open to debate. And then it opens an objection. So if the Holy Prophet is asking all his followers to learn how to read and write, why doesn't he learn how to read and write? And if knowledge is so important, then why doesn't he? He should start by learning himself. Right? That's the issue. It opens a whole door. Okay? So long story short, all we're going to say here is what it's clear, and the Holy Qur'an establishes this, is that the Holy Prophet was never seen, was not known to be someone who could read and write. That's what we know, for sure. And the Holy Qur'an repeats this, and we'll read a few verses related to that. Why is that important? Because the claim was that the Holy Prophet had copied the scripture or part of the scripture from tales, from books that he found from somewhere in a cave, that is still repeated today in some works, by the way. Or they say that he used to meet with someone, and the Qur'an says, the Qur'an even says who they thought he was meeting with to teach them, and he tells them the person you're referring to does not speak an eloquent Arabic, and this is Qur'an Arabi Mubin. This is a clear, eloquent Arabic. How could he learn this from someone who doesn't speak Arabic properly? Because he was not an Arab, the person that they were referring to. And it was magic and incantations and storytellers and old scriptures and so on and so forth. And all of these are repeated until today, right? So that's one. The second thing, so he's illiterate in that sense. He's illiterate in the sense that as a man, he did not go to someone to learn anything and become a specialist in anything. And he grew up in a world that is completely secluded from the centers of knowledge and expertise in the world in anything intellectual. And then when you start looking at the Quran, you see that it talks about anything and everything in a very specialized manner. It talks about things like the heaven and the earth and water, from biology to the creation to things that today we call geology, we call meteorology. We have the nations, the history of the nations. We have laws related to economics and finance. We have things related to psychology. And it goes on and on and on. When did he have time to learn all of this? Where did all of this knowledge come from? And today, for all this time, no one has ever come back and say there is something factual, presented as factual in the Quran, that is actually not accurate. Nothing, not one bit, one piece of information that says it doesn't match, let's say, with the findings of science, the findings of the experts in any field. It's in this sense that we say he's illiterate. He was never learned in this manner. He's not an expert in any of this. So where is this knowledge coming from? That's the second meaning, especially when we put it together with where did he grow up? In the middle of the desert with these, nomads or now recent city dwellers who don't really have access to knowledge. And we know in history they say between 8 and 11 people knew how to read and write in the entire Arabian Peninsula when Islam began. So that gives you an idea of the level of knowledge they had. And then you compare with what's in the Quran. Where is this coming from? Okay? So when you put all of this together, and we'll go back to it inshallah in more detail the next time, the verses in the Quran, so one of them says, and you did not recite any book before it, nor did you write it with your right, so with your right hand. So you're never seen reading a book, nor were you seen ever writing. For then the impugners or the disbelievers would have been full of doubt. So if they had seen you do this before, then they would have said, well, they've seen you hold a book before. They've seen where you may have been able to get that knowledge. But that excuse, that argument does not work against the Prophet, because in their world, from their perspective, he doesn't know how to read and write. That's one verse. The second one. Say, had Allah so wished, I would not have recited it to you, nor would He have made it known to you. I have indeed dwelled a lifetime among you before. Will you then not apply reason? So, from the people who lived with the Prophet for 40 years, have I done anything before that would give you the impression that I could have stolen this from somewhere, in secret or not, and reused it, repackaged it into this scripture? The last verse, and if you are in doubt concerning what we have sent down to our servant, then bring a surah. So this is the same verse that we said from Surah Al-Baqarah. This is where I said the Arabic becomes difficult to translate. The Arabic says, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ. So either it means, then bring a surah like it, like the surah in the Qur'an, or bring a surah from someone like him. Go find someone illiterate, go find someone who can't read and write, who grew up in that kind of world, and get him to give us a surah of that type. That's the min mithlihi. Min mithlihi could be the Qur'an, from like it, or like it, like him, from like him. Give us a chapter from like him. And invoke all the helpers or witnesses besides Allah, should you be truthful. We're going to stop here, and inshallah in the next lesson we are going to finish this, and we'll see if we have time to start the next lesson or not. So what we have left is to finish the argument related to the miraculous nature of the Holy Quran, and then we'll start the next topic, which is the authenticity of the Holy Quran. And is this the original book or not, as it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. No, I should leave. I'm late.